Welcome to the Growth Mindset Signals Atlas. Our whole thing here is to map the hidden mental signals behind learning, resilience, and, long-term improvement. So, in this explainer, we're going to decode something you've probably seen a million times: why those consistent small actions almost always beat out the dramatic, grand gestures.
So, here's the central question we're really digging into. It's this paradox that trips up so many ambitious people. I'm talking founders, seasoned pros, you name it. You know the drill, right? You pour everything into this massive burst of effort, you feel super productive, but then a month goes by and you're basically right back where you started, just wondering, why didn't that do anything? And this really lays out the core conflict. You've got perceived progress on one side. That's the big launch, the all-nighter. It's the stuff that feels like you're making huge strides. The high-drama events that, let's be honest, kind of stroke our ego. But then, on the other side, you have actual progress. The daily rep, the small edit. It's the quiet, repeatable, almost boring stuff. The thing is, our brains are just wired to love the show on the left. But our real, lasting results, they're built by the slow, steady process on the right.
Okay, so this brings us to our first signal. Let's call it the allure of the grand gesture. We really need to unpack what this is and why it's so misleading when you're trying to build something that lasts.
So, what's really going on here? Well, a grand gesture is exactly what it sounds like: a dramatic, high-intensity action. Think about deciding to rebuild your entire product in a single weekend, or totally overhauling your company's strategy on New Year's Day. It gives you this immediate rush, this huge hit of satisfaction. It makes you feel like the kind of person who gets big things done. But here's the problem. It's a total sugar high. It feels great for a moment, but it doesn't actually build any kind of foundation for real, lasting change.
Right, and this attraction to the big, flashing move, it's not some isolated quirk. It actually builds into a really recognizable pattern. You can see it everywhere, from startup culture to just, trying to learn a new skill for your job. And here are the real-world consequences. I mean, we've all seen this stuff, right? Failed New Year's resolutions? Classic example. Or those massive project kickoffs that just fizzle out after a few weeks. The boom and bust cycles in careers. These aren't a bunch of separate problems. Nope. They are all symptoms of the exact same underlying pattern, choosing a single burst of intensity over a steady rhythm of consistency.
Here's the bottom line. Intensity feels like progress. It really does. But it almost never produces a compounding effect. We confuse that feeling of being totally exhausted with the reality of actually getting somewhere. It's like trying to run a full marathon on your first day of training doesn't make you a runner, it just gets you injured. Real progress is way less dramatic, but it's so much more powerful, and that's because it actually compounds.
So let's go a little deeper and look under the hood at the cognitive mechanics here. Why do our brains fall for this trap so easily? Well, it really boils down to a conflict between how we process rewards versus how we build habits through repetition.
The antidote to the grand gesture is what we can call the micro-action. This is a small, repeatable action that's designed to bypass all that psychological resistance and just build momentum. So instead of building a whole new feature, you write one paragraph of code. Instead of redesigning the entire sales funnel, you just make one sales call. The genius of this approach is that the action is almost too small to fail. It's specifically engineered to slip right past our brain's natural resistance to doing hard things, and that lets you build momentum day after day.
And when you look at the outcome over time, the story couldn't be clearer. That grand gesture, it gives you this huge spike at the very beginning, but it's totally unsustainable and it drops off to pretty much zero fast. The consistent action, on the other hand, starts out looking tiny, almost invisible, but with every single repetition, it compounds. And over time, that trajectory doesn't just go up, it actually accelerates, and it ends up completely dwarfing the results from that initial flashy burst.
Okay, so getting this signal wrong isn't harmless. Not at all. It comes with a very real, very predictable cost. And that cost is a place where a ton of potential just stalls out. We call it the burnout plateau.
And this is a really critical insight to grasp. Burnout isn't some bug or an accident that happens when you're using the grand gesture model. It's a feature. It's the inevitable, baked-in outcome of a broken system. You're trying to power your growth with a fuel source, pure willpower, that is absolutely finite and runs out really, really fast.
And this burnout, it's not just a one-time thing. It's a cycle, and it's super predictable. It starts with that intense effort, right? That completely depletes your willpower, which then leads to inconsistent action or, no action at all.
Then you stagnate, you get frustrated, and you eventually reset to try another grand gesture. This is the exact cycle that kills so many promising projects and careers. It's not one big failure. It's death by 1,000 exhausting resets that never, ever build real momentum.
So the big question is, how do people who consistently grow break this cycle? Well, here's the secret. It's not about having more grit or more discipline. It's about a fundamental shift in perspective. It's about design over discipline.
High performers credit design, not discipline. This is really the whole key. People who achieve sustainable long-term growth aren't just relying on being superhuman. They're not willpower warriors. No, they are simply better architects. They design systems and environments around them that make the right actions the easiest actions to take.
So what does that architecture actually look like? Well, you can think of it as a consistency engine, and it has 3 basic parts. First, you make the action automatic. Turn it into a habit that you just do without thinking. Second, you reduce decision fatigue. You just get rid of choices. Your code editor is already open when you start your computer. The first task of the day is already laid out. And third, you build in feedback loops, so you can actually see the tiny bits of progress you're making, and that's what fuels your motivation to keep going.
All right, now let's turn this whole analysis back to you. We've mapped out the signal, we've looked at the pattern, and we've identified the shift. The final step here is to apply all these observations to your own work, to your own life.
So first question for you. What big effort are you currently mistaking for progress? Seriously, take a second and think about it. Where are you pouring a massive amount of energy that gives you that immediate feeling of accomplishment, but really isn't compounding into any kind of lasting result?
Okay, next question. What small action, if you repeated it daily, could compound into a really significant outcome? Find that alternative. What is the smallest possible move you could make day in and day out? The one that feels almost too tiny to even matter, but you know that if you did it consistently, it would build undeniable momentum over the next year. And finally, maybe the most important question of all, what system, not goal, would fundamentally change your trajectory? I want you to stop focusing on the outcome just for a minute, and instead ask yourself, what's the repeatable system I could design that would make that outcome pretty much inevitable? Because that shift in focus, from chasing goals to building engines, well, that's the absolute essence of sustainable growth.